I always believed that my marriage with Laura was strong. We had been together for over 15 years, and while our relationship wasn't flawless, I never imagined it could crumble like this. But one morning, everything took a dramatic turn. As Laura was getting ready for work, I hugged her goodbye, and something fell off. When my hand brushed against her lower back, I noticed she wasn't wearing any underwear. Under normal circumstances, that might have been a thrill, but this time it left me feeling uneasy. I lifted the hem of her skirt, struggling to keep my voice steady. "Why aren't you wearing anything under this?" I asked, my tone teetering on the edge of shouting. She pulled back from me as if my concern didn't matter, hardly acknowledging my presence. "You'll understand everything tonight," she replied cryptically, rushing out the door before I could respond. I stood there for a moment, dumbfounded, trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. My mind was racing with questions, yet there were no answers. Without thinking, I grabbed my phone and quickly messaged my friend Megan. "She's gone. I think something's wrong. Can you help me?" I typed, and Megan's response came almost instantly. "I've got someone watching her. We'll find out soon enough." This whole ordeal began 2 days prior. I was working my usual night shift when we received a call about a minor traffic accident. After confirming everyone was all right, I took a break and headed to the restroom. That's when I felt it, an intense, sharp pain that hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't help but cry out, hunched over in discomfort. Ethan, a colleague, heard my cries and rushed in. "Hey, are you all right?" he asked, his face contorted with concern as he saw me doubled over. "I don't know," I groaned, still racked with pain. Ethan glanced at the urinal and cringed. "That doesn't look good, man. You need to get that checked out." I followed his gaze to see greenish discharge. My heart sank. I knew what it indicated, and so did he. "Thanks. I'll visit a clinic first thing in the morning. Don't want to raise any alarms at the hospital," I replied, trying to sound composed. The next morning, I headed to a nearby hospital, hoping to avoid running into anyone I knew. Fortunately, the waiting room was empty, and I was called in quickly. After some tests, I found myself anxiously sitting in an exam room, fear gnawing at me. A nurse entered first, avoiding my gaze as she took my vitals. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she muttered before leaving the room. When the doctor finally came in, he wasted no time. "Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid I have some bad news," he said seriously. "You have chlamydia." I felt as if the ground had been yanked out from beneath me. "Chlamydia?" I echoed, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, informing me that I would need antibiotics and to refrain from any sexual activity for at least a week after treatment. Also, he added, my recent sexual partners would need to be tested as well. Staring blankly at him, my thoughts were racing. "There's only been one," I said quietly. "My wife." The realization hit hard. Laura had given me an STD. I couldn't comprehend how this had happened. We had been married for so long, and as far as I knew, neither of us had been unfaithful. I had to confide in someone, so I called my parents. My dad answered, sounding cheerful and blissfully unaware of the storm brewing in my life. "Hey, Dad, can I come over? I've got a problem," I said, trying to maintain my composure. "Of course, son. We'll put on some coffee. Come on by," he replied, his voice warm and inviting, providing the support I desperately needed. Growing up, my family had strong religious values, emphasizing fidelity and abstinence before marriage. I had adhered to those teachings, remaining a virgin until I married Laura at 23. Back then, she had been patient, guiding me through my inexperience and showing me what she enjoyed. I had always believed our intimate life was healthy. It might not have been wild or adventurous, but it had worked for a time at least, or so I thought. When I arrived at my parents' house, my dad welcomed me with a hug at the door. "Come on in, son," he said. "Your mom's got coffee ready." I settled down with them at the dining table. After a quick prayer over our meal, my dad studied me with concern. "What's going on, Ryan? You don't seem like yourself." Taking a deep breath, I decided to just get it out in the open. "I just got back from the doctor. I have chlamydia." My mother gasped, covering her mouth in shock. "Oh my word," she whispered. My dad, however, managed to maintain his calm demeanor, though I could see the worry etched in his features. Were you unfaithful to Laura? He asked softly but directly. No, Dad. I swear I've never cheated on her, I replied, my voice trembling slightly. He nodded, believing me without hesitation. Then it's her, he said quietly. What are you going to do now? I sighed heavily, the weight of the world pressing down on me. I think I have to divorce her, I admitted, the bitter taste of those words lingering in my mouth. My mom looked heartbroken. What about the girls? Lorna and Gloria. How will they handle this? I knew my parents were concerned about my daughters. Lorna was 14, and Gloria was 13. They were old enough to grasp the situation, but still too young for this kind of betrayal to make any sense. They'll understand eventually, I said, though I was unsure. Deep down, I wasn't entirely convinced that would be enough. My dad nodded solemnly, his expression serious. Well, if infidelity is the issue, you have biblical grounds for a divorce. Suddenly, a thought seemed to spark in his mind. Let me reach out to Megan Carter. She's a family law attorney at our church and should know how to navigate this. I agreed, feeling an unexpected wave of relief. My dad had always been the go-to problem solver in tough times, and once again, he was stepping up to help me. He immediately called Megan, and within moments, I had an appointment scheduled for that afternoon. Make sure to bring your financial records, he instructed. She'll need to review them thoroughly. Once home, I began gathering the paperwork, but what I uncovered left me even more stunned. About 8 years ago, Laura had insisted on filing separate tax returns. I had gone along with it without question, but as I sifted through the old documents, I stumbled upon something strange. She had been earning significantly more than I realized, substantial bonuses and commissions that had never come up in our conversations. As I continued my search, I discovered a hidden bank account containing nearly $4 million. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Just then my phone buzzed. It was a text from Laura. Working late tonight. Don't wait up. My jaw clenched as I typed back a curt okay, struggling to keep the anger simmering inside me at bay. Laura was a stockbroker on Wall Street, and late nights were typical for her job. Or so I thought. Now I recognized it for what it really was, an excuse to conceal whatever she was doing behind my back. With the financial records and details of the secret account in hand, I headed to my meeting with Megan. When I arrived at her office, the receptionist ushered me in, and Megan greeted me with a warm yet sympathetic smile. Ryan, it's good to see you, although I wish it were under better circumstances, she said as she poured us both a cup of coffee. I recounted everything. The STD diagnosis, the hidden bank account, the late nights. Megan listened intently, taking notes the entire time. Once I finished, she leaned forward, her expression serious. Ryan, divorce isn't about finding justice. It's primarily about money. How much you have and how much a lawyer can extract from you. Even if you have proof of infidelity, you need more than just the STD to make your case. Her words landed like a ton of bricks. Despite everything I had discovered, it wasn't enough. What about the STD? Isn't that proof? I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. She shook her head. Laura's attorney could easily argue that you contracted it from someone else. Unless you have solid evidence of her cheating, it will ultimately depend on what the judge chooses to believe. She paused, then added, and regarding the hidden funds, Laura could claim it's a surprise retirement fund or come up with some other innocent excuse. It might look suspicious to us, but proving intent? That's an entirely different matter. My stomach plummeted. So, I'm basically trapped? I asked, sinking back in my chair, defeated. Megan leaned in, her demeanor softening. Not necessarily. I have a private investigator I frequently work with. He's excellent at what he does. If you want, he can start surveillance on Laura today. If she's still cheating, we'll gather more than enough evidence to present in court. It won't be cheap, but it's the kind of solid evidence that holds up legally. I nodded, feeling a flicker of hope igniting within me. Let's proceed, I said, resolute in my need to uncover the full truth, regardless of the cost. Great, Megan replied, reaching for a notepad. I'll need details about Laura's car, make, model, and license plate. Do you have any idea where she might be right now? I remember the tracking app one had installed on Laura's phone after she misplaced it a few years back. Opening the app, I quickly located her current position. Got it, I said, showing her the address on my screen. She's at a house up north. Megan scribbled down the information. Perfect. I'll get the investigator on this immediately. As she called him, providing all the necessary details, I could feel my heart racing with anticipation. After hanging up, she turned back to me. We should have answers soon if anything's happening. I nodded, trying to maintain my composure. What about the kids? I asked, suddenly protective of my daughters. Can I secure custody? Megan sighed. It's going to be challenging. Courts usually favor the mother, especially if she hasn't been proven unfit. However, if you've been the primary caregiver and you're willing to fight for it, we can definitely make an attempt. I've been the one taking care of them, I replied, frustration bubbling to the surface. Laura is hardly home in the evenings. I've always ensured they have what they need. That's a strong point, Megan noted, nodding. It'll help your case. Are you sure the girls are biologically yours? The question took me off guard, a wave of doubt crashing over me. I think so. I'm on their birth certificates, and I've raised them their whole lives. But does it really matter? It could, Megan said gently. Having that certainty could bolster your case if you want to be absolutely sure. I know a lab that can provide quick, discreet DNA testing, Megan said, handing me a business card for a testing center. I hesitated briefly before taking it, the weight of uncertainty heavy in my chest. Okay, I'll consider it, I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. Megan quickly shifted to another pressing matter. What about your house? It's held in a family trust, and we paid off the mortgage, I explained. That's a relief, she said, her expression turning slightly more optimistic. It simplifies things, but we still need to sort through the other assets. Everything will be split 50-50ths. I'll give you a checklist of what we need to account for. I nodded, feeling the enormity of it all begin to overwhelm me. Is there anything else I should be doing right now? For now, let's get the paperwork rolling, Megan advised, sliding a checklist across the table toward me. But I recommend we hold off on making any major decisions until we see what the investigator uncovers. And one more thing, you may want to confront Laura about the STD. It's crucial that you inform her legally. I'll take care of it, I said, feeling the oppressive weight of the day pressing down on me. Good, Megan replied, her tone serious as I rose to leave. And Ryan, I know this is incredibly tough, but try not to act impulsively. Take it one day at a time. It will get better. I expressed my gratitude and headed out. Before going home, I stopped by the lab to pick up a DNA test kit. The thought that my daughters might not be mine gnawed at me, a haunting possibility I didn't want to face. But after everything that had been revealed, I realized I couldn't ignore the truth. From there, I went to the bank to investigate Laura's secret account. The numbers confirmed my worst fears. She had hidden away nearly $4 million without my knowledge. When I got back home, I plopped down at the kitchen table, staring blankly into my coffee cup, my mind racing with disbelief. Most guys would probably turn to alcohol to drown their sorrows, but I had never touched a drop. I was raised with strict principles, and even though my world was crumbling, I wasn't about to break that rule now. As I replayed the events of that morning in my mind, Laura pulling away from me with that cryptic promise, I felt a chill creep down my spine. It was clear she had been plotting something sinister, and part of me was terrified to discover what that something might be. Later that day, my daughters burst through the front door, their youthful energy a stark contrast to my heavy heart. "Daddy, you're home!" Lorna exclaimed, rushing to wrap her arms around me. Gloria stood back a little, looking more reserved. "Are you okay? Why aren't you at work?" I forced a smile, pulling them both into a hug. "I'm fine, girls, but I need you to pack some bags. You're going to stay with Grandma and Grandpa for a few days." Lorna's smile faded instantly. "What's going on? Did you and Mom have a fight?" "Not exactly," I replied, struggling to maintain my composure. "But something isn't right. We need to sort things out." Lorna's eyes widened, as if she sensed there was more to the story. "You caught her cheating, didn't you?" Her question hit me like a slap to the face. "What makes you say that?" I asked, my heart racing. She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I overheard some of her phone calls. She giggles like a schoolgirl. It was creepy." I pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the fragility of the moment. "It's okay, sweetheart. You can talk to me about anything. Letting out a sigh, I reluctantly admitted, but yeah, you're right. Gloria, still lingering nearby, pointed to the DNA test kit on the table. What's that for? I paused, searching for the right words. It's something my lawyer suggested for legal reasons. After that conversation with my daughters, my heart felt heavier. I never wanted them to be caught in the middle of this chaos. But here we were. I explained that the DNA test was just a precaution for the legal process. Lorna and Gloria agreed, though I could see the worry etched on their faces. Once we finished swabbing their cheeks and mine, I sent them upstairs to pack their things. Don't forget your homework, I called after them, trying to inject a sense of normalcy into an increasingly surreal situation. When they were finally ready, we drove over to my parents' house. The girls sat silently in the back seat, the tension palpable. Upon arrival, they quickly hugged me and rushed inside without asking too many questions. I embraced them tightly, knowing that I might not be able to shield them from the storm that was brewing. Later that evening, I sat alone at the kitchen table, the oppressive silence of the house closing in on me. My phone suddenly rang, cutting through the stillness. It was Megan. "Ryan, we have some updates from the investigator," she said, her tone grave. "Your wife has been busy, 3 different men, all since around 1 p.m. today. I'm sending you everything to your email right now. Photos, videos, audio recordings. It's more than enough to establish infidelity." After hanging up, I immediately checked my email and opened the file she sent. I skipped straight to the audio recording, desperate to hear the truth for myself. The first voice I heard was a man's. "I see you're married," he said, the clinking of glasses echoing in the background. Laura's laughter followed, light, carefree, and seemingly untroubled. "For now," she replied, her tone dripping with smugness. The man chuckled. "You're wearing a ring, and my wife and I have an open marriage." "Well, mine's not open," Laura shot back. "But I take my liberties where I can get them." I felt my fists clench involuntarily as I listened. The man asked, "Your husband doesn't know?" "No, he doesn't," Laura replied, her tone completely indifferent. "He has no idea what kind of woman he married." I felt an overwhelming urge to hurl my phone across the room. 15 years of marriage. And this was how she regarded me? I pressed play again, desperate to hear more despite the agony it brought me. The man's voice returned, curiosity lacing his words. "What's going on? Trouble in paradise?" Laura laughed, but this time her laughter felt cold and distant. "He's fine. I taught him everything he knows. Can you believe it? He was a virgin when we got married, 23 years old, and had never even kissed anyone else. Total Bible thumper. He doesn't drink, doesn't smoke, doesn't even curse. He'd probably faint if I mentioned the word damn around him." The man's laughter echoed, and Laura joined in. Each word twisted like a knife in my gut. "Sounds like a real square," the man quipped, still chuckling. "Why do you stay with him? Do you even love the guy?" There was a pause, and I held my breath, anticipation coiling tightly in my chest. When she finally responded, her tone was dismissive. "I guess sort of. He's good with the kids and doesn't ask questions when I'm out late. But God, he's so boring." Every word felt like a punch, a crushing blow as she dismissed our entire life together as inconsequential. The man pressed on. "And the kids? Are they his?" Laura's reply was flippant. "Who knows? Who cares? He thinks they are, and that's what matters." I stopped the recording abruptly, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The room seemed to spin around me. I had trusted her for all these years. I had loved her. We had built a life together, and this was how she viewed me? My mind struggled to process the betrayal. Just then, my phone buzzed again, jolting me from my thoughts. It was Laura. I hesitated to answer, but I knew I had to keep my cool, at least for now. I picked up the call. "Ryan, are you okay?" she asked, her voice dripping with sweetness, as if nothing were wrong. "You sound a little off." "Rough day," I replied, forcing a semblance of normalcy into my voice, though I could barely suppress the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "I'll be home in about an hour," she said, her tone suddenly playful. "Still no underwear? You waiting?" I clenched my jaw, fighting to remain calm. "Sure," I said tersely. I love you, she chirped, completely unaware of what I now knew. Me too, I replied flatly, hanging up the call without a second thought. I sat there for what felt like an eternity, staring at my phone. Did she even notice that I hadn't said it back? In truth, I didn't care anymore. How could I love her after everything I had just heard? As the minutes dragged on, I gathered my thoughts. I printed out the most damning photos from Megan's email and neatly placed them in an envelope. Then I settled at the kitchen table, waiting for Laura to come home. An hour ticked by, then two. Still no sign of her. I grew anxious despite myself and called her phone. It went straight to voicemail. By the time 4 hours had passed, I was pacing around the house, restless and uncertain about my next move. Just as I was about to give up hope, the home phone rang. Dread filled me as I picked it up. Ryan Thompson speaking. I said, my voice weary. Mr. Thompson, this is Nina Collins from Grace Hospital. Your wife has been in an accident. Can you come down immediately? My heart raced as I struggled to process her words. Is she okay? What happened? I'm sorry, but I can't disclose details over the phone. The doctor will speak with you when you arrive, she replied, her tone professional and unyielding. Without a second thought, I grabbed the envelope of incriminating photos and rushed out the door, my mind swirling with confusion. As I headed straight for the hospital, I had no idea what awaited me. I knew the confrontation I had been preparing for would have to be postponed. When I arrived, my heart pounded as though it might burst from my chest. At the courtesy desk, I provided the receptionist with Laura's name. She typed something into the computer, then nodded toward a colleague. Please escort Mr. Thompson to the ICU, she instructed as I followed the nurse into the intensive care unit. I felt as though I were moving through a thick fog, my emotions in turmoil. Part of me was still furious with Laura, but another part of me was gripped by fear. No matter what she had done, she was still the mother of my children. Outside the ICU, a police officer approached me. Mr. Thompson, I'm Officer Simpson. I responded to your wife's accident. My pulse quickened. What happened? I asked, a chill racing down my spine. She was crossing the road when a motorcycle sped between the cars and hit her, he explained. The driver was under the influence of drugs at the time. I'm sorry. I was about to ask more questions, but just then, the doctor approached us. Mr. Thompson, I'm Dr. Smith. I've been overseeing your wife's case. How is she? I asked, bracing myself for the worst. She's in critical condition, Dr. Smith said, his expression grave. She has multiple fractures, internal injuries, and severe head trauma. We placed her in a medically induced coma to help reduce the swelling in her brain. Right now, it's touch and go. My knees nearly buckled as I processed everything that was happening. I could hardly bear the thought of Laura like this. Lying there, broken and vulnerable. She had always been my rock, my stronghold. Dr. Smith continued, there's something else you need to know. Were you aware of your wife's chlamydia diagnosis? I could only manage a flat response. I just found out this morning. You also need to be tested for HIV, he said, his words slicing through the haze of disbelief surrounding me. We've conducted tests on Laura, and while we're still waiting for results, there's a chance she may be HIV positive. The ground felt like it was shifting beneath my feet. HIV, I echoed, barely able to comprehend the severity of the situation. Yes, Dr. Smith replied gently. If you haven't been tested yet, I strongly recommend you see your doctor as soon as possible. If you test positive, treatment can help you manage it. But the sooner you know, the better. I nodded numbly, the implications of his words crashing down on me like a tidal wave. How long will she be here? It's hard to say, he replied. She could remain in the ICU for weeks, maybe even longer. We're keeping a close watch on her. He led me into Laura's room, and my heart plummeted at the sight. There she was, swathed in bandages, one leg encased in a cast that extended to her hip. Her face was a canvas of swelling and bruises, stitched together in multiple places. This was not the woman I had spent the last 15 years with. She looked like a survivor of some brutal battle. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, grappling with a whirlwind of emotions. She had wounded me in ways I never thought possible, yet witnessing her in such a fragile state still tore at my heart. After a moment of hesitation, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope of damning photos. I removed my wedding ring, the very symbol of our life together, and placed it inside the envelope next to the pictures, then wrote her name on the outside. "Excuse me." I called softly to a nurse who entered the room. A young woman stepped in, her expression a mix of compassion and professionalism. "Can you make sure she gets this when she wakes up?" I asked, handing her the envelope. She nodded reassuringly. "Of course, sir." As I turned to leave, I hesitated at the door, casting one last glance at Laura. As much as I wanted to despise her, seeing her so vulnerable tugged at my heartstrings. She had made her choices, but now fate seemed to have dealt her a cruel hand. "Goodbye, Laura," I whispered, stepping out into the hall. Back at home, I collapsed onto my bed, utterly drained physically, emotionally, mentally. The past few days had felt like a surreal nightmare, and I wasn't sure how much more I could withstand. In the weeks that followed, I began to make arrangements for Laura's recovery. I found a small 2-bedroom apartment, paid the deposit, and covered the first 2 months' rent using her share of our joint accounts. The apartment included a garage where I moved all of her belongings, providing her a space to heal once she was released from the hospital. 3 weeks after that traumatic night at the hospital, I received the all-clear from my doctor. Thankfully, I tested negative for HIV, and while it felt like a small victory, the emotional wounds inflicted by Laura's betrayal were still fresh and painful. Physical healing was one thing. I knew it would take far longer to move past the devastation she had wrought on my heart. Finally, 3 weeks after her accident, Laura woke up from her coma. I dropped the girls off at my parents' house before making my way to the hospital to see her. With each passing mile, I steeled myself for the confrontation I was about to face. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to see it through. Upon arriving, I noticed Dr. Smith engaged in conversation with the nurses. Nearby, a man in a brown jacket held a manila envelope, clearly the process server. "How is she?" I asked Dr. Smith as I approached. "She's stable," he said, his tone measured. "Her vitals are good, and the infection from the chlamydia has cleared up. We're just keeping her under observation now." I took a deep breath, feeling a flicker of hope amidst the storm of emotions swirling in my mind. The process server followed me into Laura's room, lingering at the back as I stepped up to her bedside. Laura looked up at me, her eyes weary but alert. She caught sight of the open envelope I had left on the table beside her. "Ryan," she said weakly, almost as if she were testing the waters. "Laura," I replied cautiously, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. She gestured toward the envelope. "So, you found out?" "Yes," I affirmed, my tone unwavering. "You passed your illness to me, and I have all the proof I need." The process server stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Are you Laura Thompson?" he asked, his demeanor formal. "Yes," Laura replied, her voice barely a whisper. He handed her the manila envelope and quickly snapped a photo with his phone. "You've been served," he stated before quietly exiting the room. Laura's face crumpled at the realization. "You couldn't even wait until I was out of the hospital?" she asked, her voice breaking. "No," I replied firmly. "You were planning to leave me anyway. I just expedited your timeline." Tears welled in her eyes as she processed the gravity of the situation. "Do the girls know?" she asked, her voice small and trembling. "They know," I said coldly. "And they're not exactly thrilled with you right now, which is why they're not here. Don't worry about being responsible for them. I'm seeking full custody. They'll see you if they want to," I continued. "But for now, they want nothing to do with you." Her expression twisted further in despair. "I guess you hate me too," she muttered, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. I stood there, feeling the weight of everything that had happened, yet I remained resolute. "You made your choices, Laura," I said, my voice firm and unwavering. "This isn't about hatred. It's about confronting the consequences of your choices." I asserted, my voice steady. She quickly shifted the topic, clearly uncomfortable with the weight of our conversation. "How long will I be in the hospital?" "According to the doctor, probably another week, maybe longer," I replied, my heart heavy. "After that, you'll move into the apartment I rented for you. I've already taken care of moving all your belongings in. The utilities are in your name. You'll be fine." I pulled an envelope from my jacket and handed it to her. This is your half of our joint accounts, minus the deposit and the first 2 months' rent. Her hands trembled as she accepted the envelope, her gaze lingering on the money that had once symbolized our shared life. But then her demeanor shifted, hardening. What about my other account? I looked her squarely in the eyes. My lawyer has frozen your secret account. You'll gain access to it again only after you sign the divorce papers. You can take half, the other half is mine. Her expression morphed into shock. You froze it, she said, disbelief lacing her tone. I'll fight you for it. I leaned closer, lowering my voice to a controlled whisper. That would be a grave mistake, Laura. If you choose to fight me, all the evidence, the photos, videos, and recordings will become public. Is that really the path you want to take? She paled at the thought, her defiance wavering after a long moment. Fine, she whispered. I'll sign the papers. Good, I replied, turning to leave, but just as I reached the door, she called out after me. Can I call the girls? Her voice was fragile, as if she feared the answer, yet needed to ask. I paused, my hand on the door handle. You can try, I said, my tone softening. But don't be surprised if they don't answer. She nodded, the weight of my words settling in. Thank you. At least for that, she said quietly. Without another word, I walked out of the room, leaving her to face the reality she had created. As I passed by the nurses, I caught a few giving me disapproving looks, but I brushed it off. Their opinions were the least of my concerns. I had bigger battles ahead. The divorce was finalized swiftly. I made sure that Laura's hidden account was split evenly, with my half, $2 million, going straight into college funds for Lorna and Gloria. I had no interest in claiming the money for myself. It was always about ensuring a secure future for them. Not long after, I received the final results of my HIV test, negative. A wave of relief washed over me, lifting a heavy burden from my shoulders. I had narrowly escaped a dire fate, but I knew that the emotional scars from Laura's betrayal would take much longer to heal. As time passed, life began to move forward. The girls eventually resumed communication with Laura, but it took nearly a year for them to feel ready to see her in person. I chose not to interfere. I wanted them to make that decision independently, to come to terms with everything in their own time. As for me, I concentrated on rebuilding my life. It wasn't easy. There were days when anger and hurt bubbled to the surface, threatening to overwhelm me. Yet with time, I found strength I didn't know I possessed. I became determined to create a stable and loving environment for my daughters. In the end, Laura became a chapter in my life. Painful, yes, but one that ultimately taught me valuable lessons about resilience and self-worth. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I will never allow anyone to exploit my trust again. And no matter what happens, I will always be there for my girls. Dear listeners, thank you for your unwavering support and for tuning into my stories on YouTube. Your enthusiasm and feedback mean everything to me. Stay tuned for more engaging tales. Warm regards.